The Beat. I'm ARI MELBER. We're tracking several stories right now, including ongoing sparring over the end of the year spending bill in Washington. You can see preparations where the Democratic leader Jeffries is preparing to speak. We're told that could come here any moment, and we're going to listen to what Democratic leader Jeffries has to say about this ongoing spending clash when he comes out there. So you've watched the news before. You know how this works. It's a development in these ongoing battles to get the government funded. Elon Musk has been weighing in, complicating the situation for Republicans. So we'll go to that when we see action and news. We'll turn, though, right now to the other top story that we're covering, which is government activity that follows Trump's vows to take revenge on his perceived foes. There are people, you may have heard some of them, who said this was campaign rhetoric, or you can't always believe Trump, or wait and see. Well, tonight I can tell you the time for that kind of talk and waiting is over. House Republicans are using their government power to go after a conservative official who investigated the January 6th insurrection. Before I get to what they're doing, I want to begin with the facts. Imagine that. Fact number one. All members of Congress, regardless of party, have wide legal protection from prosecution for the work they do inside Congress, for what they say on the House floor or how they carry out their duties on a committee. It is a very high bar for the government in a different branch to prosecute a lawmaker for that kind of work, for those activities, unless you really find something like evidence, say, of bribery to sell government activity. We have seen members of both parties get in that kind of trouble. It relates to their government work, but it is a high bar. Fact number two. There is no such public evidence right now against any of the members of the January 6th committee. Fact number three. Congresswoman Liz Cheney spent her career as a Republican. Most people who follow politics are aware of that. She even rose to the GOP's leadership in the Trump era. She backed Donald Trump in 2020. But as you may have heard, he's been vowing revenge against her over her actual work in Congress. What I just told you about, that's usually protected material, protected activity. Liz Cheney today, I can tell you, is saying that January 6th revealed Donald Trump to be a cruel and vindictive man, and that his Republican allies in Congress are now fabricating lies and, quote, defamatory allegations in an attempt to cover up what Trump did. Now, that reference to defamation suggests one way that Cheney could potentially push back against attacks on her if she views them as defamatory and wants to go to civil courts to get justice for that. Now, to why we're talking about this right now. Tonight, Liz Cheney is responding to efforts to go after her in this period before Trump even takes office. As House Republicans, her former colleagues, demand that she be criminally investigated by the FBI for her work, which they know all about. It's work they also do. It's work she did in Congress alongside them, whether they disagree on certain matters. The congressional work, a co-equal branch of government, of investigating the attack on their workplace, the Capitol, on January 6th, when Trump fans turned it into a crime scene. And in the hours after those now convicted attackers, some of them seditionists, were finally removed and ejected, remember, many top Republicans flatly condemned that violence.
We will not be kept out of this chamber by thugs, mobs, or threats.
Chaos, anarchy. The violence today was wrong and un-American.
All I can say is count me out. Enough is enough.
Those are just some of the Republicans who were condemning the attack that night. Again, they were condemning the thing that Donald Trump helped foment and that Liz Cheney and others later investigated inside of Congress. They were speaking then, though, when the threat and their fear was fresh. Now many of those Republican voices are not only joining these plots to minimize the attack, to will it to be something different than it was. Some are accepting Donald Trump's vows, public stated plans to pardon the very convicts who attacked the Capitol, what you just heard them condemn, who attacked the police, who made, in a very personal, real way, their workplace, their lives, their jobs, even potentially their families who were visiting that day, all more dangerous. And some Republicans going further, pushing new calls to investigate Cheney. So I'm going to pause here. As I said, let's listen into Leader Jeffries.
Keep it open and meet the needs of the American people. We reached a bipartisan agreement to provide disaster assistance to everyday Americans whose lives have been upended and turned upside down as a result of hurricanes, tornadoes, wildfires, floods, and other types of extreme weather events. We reached a bipartisan agreement to meet the needs of the American people and provide assistance to farmers, families, children, seniors, veterans, men and women in uniform, and working class Americans. House Republicans have now unilaterally decided to break a bipartisan agreement that they made. House Republicans have been ordered to shut down the government and hurt everyday Americans all across this country. House Republicans will now own any harm that is visited upon the American people that results from a government shutdown or worse. An agreement is an agreement. It was bipartisan, and there is nothing more to say. Thank you.
What about the debt limit? Is that possible here, Mr. Jeffries?
What is Speaker Johnson saying?
Have you talked to the Speaker?
We've been listening to those new remarks just live right there in the Capitol there by Leader Jeffries, the Democratic leader. What he's referring to is the ongoing skirmishes over these spending battles. Remember, the new Congress that was elected hasn't been sworn in, so Republicans will have more power soon in January, but this is cleaning up basically the spending deals they had for the year. Leader Jeffries arguing that there was a bipartisan deal, basically that was ready to go, and he's saying it's now been blown up, and he's warning about the consequences of that if the disaster funding and other materials don't go out to the country. I will just remind you, if you follow the news, you may know in years past, there are a lot of ninth inning, bottom of the ninth battles about these spending clashes that don't lead to a government shutdown, although both sides know if the brinksmanship gets out of control, that's where it could end. So that's the Leader Jeffries' response there to what he says is Republicans pulling out on their deal. I can also report for you and remind you there are conservative Republicans in the caucus who basically don't want to wait till January. They want to narrow spending even more right now. And some of them are sort of echoing or working in concert along with Elon Musk, now a Trump advisor, who has been arguing for fast action to find other spending cuts. So that is the state of play. As I told you, we wanted to bring you that update when we heard from Leader Jeffries. If more happens in the hour, we'll bring that to you as well. I'm now going to turn back to the other story we were in the middle of, which also involves this same Congress. Remember, Trump's political vendetta is now being, as I mentioned, pursued by House Republicans. They are laying the groundwork. It is precisely the kind of, quote, lawfare that Republicans have claimed to be against. They use that word lawfare as a reference to what they view as politically targeted prosecutions. And that is quite clearly, notwithstanding the potential hypocrisy, what some of them are now arguing for against Liz Cheney because Donald Trump is mad at her. I don't mean to minimize the seriousness of this, but that's kind of what it boils down to, except he wants people to abuse power on his behalf next year. So Republicans, this is the update I mentioned at the top of the hour. I gave you the context and the facts for why it's hard to just go after lawmakers this way under law, but Republicans are calling for an FBI investigation. They've issued a new report, one member, Loudermilk, going as far as to claim the committee's work with witnesses was some kind of possible federal crime. The language is that federal laws were, quote, likely broken by Liz Cheney. That's the allegation. And this is a playbook that predates Trump. Republicans have long used Congress to try to push or launder or pressure separate parts of the government in the executive branch and FBI and DOJ. Some of the efforts seem to get traction. Remember, what everyone thinks of James Comey, and he has critics across the spectrum, it was Republican pressure against him and demands that he brief them on things that they said needed even more investigation relating to Hillary Clinton's emails and other matters, and demanding those probes that led Comey to be writing letters back. Some of those, you may remember, were a big issue in 2016. But the history of that was Republicans pushing the FBI just as they demanded investigations of even sometimes mid and low-level officials who worked for President Bill Clinton, if you go back that far. Other times, these efforts flounder. There were many claims made about possible or hypothetical Biden-Ukrainian corruption deals. Those boomeranged so much, were found to be so baseless, that the feds ended up indicting a source, an informant, for lying about those kind of apparently politicized claims that were designed to go after Biden, even if the evidence wasn't there. Now the playbook, as I'm reporting for you, it runs right alongside Trump. And he repeats the calls I just mentioned against Liz Cheney coming from the House with his own posts. He's here saying the FBI must investigate. This is new. That quote there is, he posted that online. Now, one thing legally, if our system and the guardrails and the courts hold, is that kind of demand could boomerang on Donald Trump. And I can tell you exactly how. If there is such a probe later, and judges view that as evidence of a demand for selective political prosecution, go after the opponents, well, that could end those whole cases. It could get things tossed. If Trump's incoming FBI pick, if confirmed, is seen as following what is essentially an order from the president-elect issued in public, online, in broad daylight, if that's the reason the probe was started or other potential misconduct occurs, judges tend to view that very negatively. Now, no one is above being investigated in a system of rule of law, but those investigations are always supposed to begin with evidence of a crime and never with a target of just some person that the president or the governor or whomever wants to go after. Trump's seeming confession on this point is that he wants the FBI to abuse power, and as I'm reminding you, this is a new one. He's saying this after the campaign, not something that is easily dismissed as campaign rhetoric. If he wants the FBI to become his personal political police force, there are a lot of ways and a lot of parts of the government that last longer than the next 4 years that are designed to prevent exactly that. Now, you can't chalk up that new post I showed you to campaign rhetoric, which is something that I think some judges have entertained. To give you one example, in the litigation over the travel ban, which was previously sold on the campaign trail as a, quote, Muslim ban by Donald Trump, there were judges, and they're not MAGA judges or just looking to help him, but there were judges who said, we're not going to take campaign rhetoric about the travel ban and treat it as the same as what he said after the election when he's actually starting to govern. Well, here we are now after the election. As for the past attacks on, say, Liz Cheney and others, well, you've probably seen them. Those also definitely cross lines, legal or otherwise, is for judges to decide, but some of them were quite severe, with Trump saying about Cheney things like this.
Let's put her with a rifle standing there with 9 barrels shooting at her, okay? Let's see how she feels about it. You know, when the guns are trained on her face. Everybody on that committee, for what they did, honestly, they should go to jail.
What they did on a bipartisan basis, remember, there was a lot of effort to make it a bipartisan investigative committee, was talk to witnesses. Many of the key witnesses worked for Donald Trump and were, like Cheney once was, pretty lifelong Republicans, people who agreed with many of Donald Trump's policies. That's what the committee did. And Liz Cheney had an impact, not just on the committee, but really in American life, precisely because her family has this Republican history. And she has this career as an arch conservative. And so for many people, that simply proved that her opposition to Donald Trump's January 6th coup attempt and later assorted efforts to hide it, that it was based on principle, precisely because it was Liz Cheney. It was not some political or ideological disagreement that morphed into something larger. She backed Donald Trump for office in the campaign. She was in Republican leadership. She clearly backed most of his conservative domestic policies. She only broke over the January 6th insurrection.
The former president who is attempting to unravel the foundations of our constitutional republic. We have to choose, because Republicans cannot both be loyal to Donald Trump and loyal to the Constitution.
Liz Cheney chose. How is the Republican Party and Donald Trump choosing on this constitutional question? We're joined by a former prosecutor on this big development today when we're back in 90 seconds. That is just how some of the now convicted attackers on January 6th viewed their role, invited by the then outgoing president and possibly to be pardoned by him. We're joined by former federal prosecutor Ankush Khardori. He specialized in financial fraud and now also writes about the Justice Department and many legal issues for Politico magazine. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Great to have you. We'll start deposition style, something you know all about. The short question, short answer is, do lawmakers have a pretty wide berth to do their investigative duties? Is there anything valid on the public evidence against the January 6th committee here?
The answer to the first question is yes. The answer to the second question is no. I thought the Loudermilk report. So yes, you were right, obviously, about the speech and debate protections that apply to legislators and how that makes it significantly harder to bring any sort of criminal prosecution against them. And the allegations that were made yesterday in this report that was prepared by House Republicans, Barry Loudermilk in particular, if you read through them, as I'm sure that you did, they're quite far-fetched. And I do think Liz Cheney's assessment of them as allegations that really no credible lawyer or prosecutor or a judge would take particularly seriously, I do think that is actually accurate. Because as I was reading through it, I mean, it's a lot of speculation. It is a lot of imputing bad motives to her when they have no real evidence. And it's just a lot of conclusory assertions that seems to be based on speculation.
Right. And so it's this big reach in the context of really a case against potentially Donald Trump and his FBI director, whoever would potentially carry out these orders if they would, for selective prosecution and other things that get the government in trouble. I want to play for you how Liz Cheney sounded when we spoke to her. Take a listen.
What the lesson of Donald Trump of the last several years has taught us is we have to take him seriously and we have to take him literally. And he has shown us what he's willing to do.
That's what she told us here on the beat about a year ago. Do you see this effort, including Donald Trump, demanding an FBI probe of her here in public as part of that illicit effort? And should the FBI at the top or the middle resist it?
Yeah, no, I do see it as part of that illicit effort. I mean, as you noted, Trump has been talking for years, and throughout the campaign was talking for years about prosecuting his political opponents. And it was unclear at various points, like you said, like how seriously do we take this? But we're beyond the election now, as you observed. And, I think that this is a troubling sign, obviously, for people who are concerned about this sort of thing. I do think I would be surprised on the merits if it were taken seriously by the FBI and DOJ, but we don't know what Pam Bondi is going to do if she's confirmed and Kash Patel is going to do if he is confirmed, and he's wildly unsuited for that job. He should not be confirmed, but he may be. And I think that will actually be the very first significant test of how this administration is going to approach this issue, whether or not DOJ actually picks up these allegations and tries to convert them into some sort of investigation.
Then the Biden White House could thwart much of this with pardons for the January 6th investigators and others. We just heard this week from a lawyer supporting that idea. Take a listen.
It's time, I think, to think about whether or not existing authorities need to be applied in new and different ways because Trump is a new and different threat. It's at least incumbent upon Biden morally and ethically to protect those who are at risk because they were on his side.
Your view of that proposal?
Look, I understand people's concern, and I think it's a fair point to raise. The fact that the January 6th committee members themselves are telling us that they don't really want them or are concerned about these cases, I think that ought to be weighed very heavily in the balance here. I think the odds that any kind of investigation would get very far and charged by a grand jury and brought to trial and result in a jury conviction, if the facts were as Loudermilk alleged them, I don't think any of those things would happen because the case would be in D.C. I don't even think the grand jury would return an indictment if the allegations that Loudermilk outlined were presented to them. But, I understand the concern, but, if you have Adam Kinzinger who's going around saying, and I think articulating well, that these are not things that they should be super concerned about. They're going to be resolved in the courts, and particularly in the jurisdictions where they would be brought, like D.C., those jurisdictions are very blue, and the judges at both the trial and appellate levels are very solid.
Really interesting to get your views on several of these items as a prosecutor, writer, and all the above. Ankush, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. We have a lot cooking tonight. Al Sharpton will be here by the end of the hour with Harry Mack. We also are going to follow some new data that suggests this narrow election might not be a mandate for anybody, and an Obama angle. Also, Project 2025 and holding people accountable for their campaign vows. Stay with us. President-elect Trump is tapping some of the people behind Project 2025, a governing blueprint that even Trump had deemed basically too extreme to campaign on earlier this year. He and his aides disclaimed Project 2025. You may recall that during the campaign or the debate, while they outlined plans for a second term. On the beat, we pressed Trump vets on those issues to get them on record, inform the public, and also listen to all sides in an intense campaign season. We pressed some aides now poised for big roles. Stephen Miller rising to number 2 in Trump's second term White House Deputy Chief of Policy. We also found that those interviews are making some of the answers we got newly newsworthy. Here are some key parts tonight.
President Trump has said he has nothing to do with Project 2025. I believe the project has been closed. That was a project of the Heritage Foundation. And there are a lot of groups out there on both the right and the left who come up with policy initiatives and policy ideas, but it doesn't mean that the candidate's going to implement them.
The current GOP platform has a 14th Amendment effort to try to give what they sometimes call, quote unquote, fetal personhood, or basically would be synonymous with a national abortion ban. And Project 2025 tries to also go after, as you know, abortion rights, even women's right to travel if they want to move in and out of their state, which people are allowed to do. I don't know if you support, as on behalf of the campaign, policies that say a man or a woman can't leave their state for a certain reason. That's a big liberty crackdown. What do you say to people who can read these two things and say, okay, Trump and the platform are basically 25 on abortion?
Look, I know nothing about Project 2025. I've never read their document, but I will say this. President Trump did what the American people overwhelmingly wanted when it came to the issue of life. He returned it back to the states by appointing pro-life judges at the Supreme Court who overturned Roe v. Wade. And now every state gets to decide what their respective state looks like as it relates to the health of the mother, whether it has exceptions or not, because they're doing it at the ballot box, Ari. And listen, we've seen states like Kansas take the same positions as much more liberal states. But listen, we're an amazing democracy.
I mean, if you say to me, this is the laboratories of democracy, but most of the democracy, including red states, says no to you, at what point do you then respect that and reflect that in how you govern if you were in a second term and how you deal with the Supreme Court?
Ari, we know Donald Trump's been very clear. When he ran in 2016, he put out a list of potential conservative judges that he would appoint. The American people knew what his position was going to be on that. And he was very clear about that. Now that they've returned this decision to the states, I live in the state of New Hampshire. We get to vote on it, which may look very different what the state of Massachusetts does.
The Bush administration, the Obama administration, right, illegal immigrants who are not from Mexico were set free into the country. We came in and we said, doesn't matter if you're from Mexico, Central America, Africa, Asia, you're going home. Now look at 2021, 2022, and 2023. What do you see? The massive delta between encounters, and those are border returns. They're not interior removals. President Trump will send as many troops as it takes to seal up the border.
I just want to be clear. How do you address the fact, though, that the Biden administration has deportations, returns, and expulsions going up?
Okay. So I gave you the technical, precise answer. This is the soundbite version, right? When you have 3 million illegal aliens entering your country and surrendering to Border Patrol annually, even under the most paltry enforcement scheme, there will be more border returns. The only number that matters when you're talking about illegal immigration is how many get in. And under the Biden administration, millions of illegal aliens that were apprehended were then resettled and freed into our communities.
You're taking the position that that's the only number that matters, that people are learning about your position and you're an advisor to former President Trump. Other people argue a lot of other numbers matter, and Reagan, who you cited, did argue that the path to citizenship matters, that asylum and refugee programs matter. Why was it important for you to say no more Trump because of his January 6th conduct, and do you stand by that?
No, I don't stand by it, and I'll tell you why. I've now lived 4 years under the Biden-Harris policies, and I have to say that those policies are not only becoming an existential threat to our country's way of life, but to our allies as well.
You said it was a no for me after that, after January 6th.
I did.
And here we are right now.
I did.
And you're saying it's a yes for you.
It is a yes for me. It is an absolute yes for me. That is how badly the Biden-Harris team have prosecuted their job.
But the whole point you seem to be making was that January 6th and that kind of attack on democracy is bigger than any policy.
But I am seeing so many attacks on democracy that eclipse January 6th.
The ambassador said that he's concerned about protecting our allies. Well, what about Ukraine? Donald Trump has basically said that we should give parts of Ukraine away to Putin. And on top of that, he has openly invited Putin to invade some of our NATO allies. I think the difference between us is that I'm willing to set policy aside in this election. I don't agree with Kamala Harris on most things. But at the end of the day, you know what we can agree on? That we respect the Constitution, that I believe she is someone who will uphold it. And Donald Trump has shown us that he won't. He is the first president in our nation's history to disrupt the peaceful transfer of power.
There you have it, a diversity of views even within Trump officials. You heard from people there who served in the Trump White House and in other roles, some who testified against Trump, some who said they couldn't vote for him and then went back to him, and some who are now returning to his second term White House. I've told you before, we try to cover all of the information here from all sides and bring you the facts while also fact-checking and holding people accountable in real time. We will try to continue to do that no matter what politics, news, and life brings us in the new year. And there's a lot more coming up tonight. It has been a pivotal year for music, and Al Sharpton will draw on his James Brown experience as we look at hip-hop and Kendrick Lamar having a big year next year with the Super Bowl halftime show. Harry Mack is here for some fun by the end of the hour. But first, a fact check on the politics of this Trump era and our friend Ari Berman on the beat coming up. Donald Trump left office in shambles and faced a lot of criticism and legal cases. And he had quite a political comeback in winning this election. All those things happened. But life goes on, and right now we are seeing that he still enters a second term in a weak position according to the data and any measurement across modern history. He won the election by about 1.5 points, approaching 50% of the vote, not quite reaching it overall. It's a couple weeks later, 41% of Americans view him favorably, which speaks to this Trump paradox. Now, just compare that to history. The last, say, Republican president entering a second term after a re-election consecutive, George W. Bush, had a 49% approval rating. So 8 points higher, which fits given that he just won a close race with about half of the country. Obama, though, who had a more decisive re-election, was at 57% at the same point, preparing for his second term. So this is something on the minds of politicians in both parties as they make sense of someone who won by 1.5 and is telling you it's the biggest thing ever. Democrats are also trying to figure out how to both approach that and not be overly rattled by Trump's lead and talk of his edge, but also being open to improving what was still a performance that led to a loss. Take, for example, Congressman Richie Torres.
The far left is a gift to Donald Trump, and it's a gift that will keep on giving until there's a serious reckoning with the results of the election and a serious recalibration. You know, if we swing the pendulum too far to the left on core issues like public safety and immigration, we are going to alienate the majority of the American people. That's a statement of political reality. As a party, we have a choice. We can either choose to be ideologically pure, or we can choose to win elections. We can either choose to be ideologically pure, or we can choose to govern in a manner that enables us to win elections.
Do you worry, and what happened if we say possibly, for the sake of argument, that in today's world, among many young people, including black and brown people in urban areas and under 40 and other folks, the cool rebel thing is now supposedly the Republican Party. Is that a real concern, and how did that happen?
I am concerned that there are increasing numbers of men who are gravitating toward the Republican Party, and we have to outreach to those men. If we have confidence in our messaging as Democrats, we have to take our message everywhere. We have to take our message in every corner of the media ecosystem, including alternative media. We have to be careful not to scold or scapegoat or shame anyone. You know, condescension is not only bad morals, it's bad politics. So it's not only going to lose you goodwill, it's going to lose you elections. And so we have to listen and learn and be careful never to shame or scapegoat.
That's what we heard from one Democrat post-election, clearly talking about listening and the party being open to criticism or its branding. On the other hand, beyond the politics and all of that discussion, there's structural issues in the way that democracy works today that seems to undercount certain people's votes and power. If you've noticed that, and it feels like it's not an even playing field, our next guest assiduously documents why that is the case. Mother Jones reporter ARI Berman is the author of Minority Rule, the right-wing attack and the will of the people in the fight to resist it. And full disclosure, he's been a erstwhile on and off colleague of mine in political journalism for 2 decades, man.
And we are, in fact, 2 different people, as you can see on air right now.
We are 2 different Aris, and we worked at the same place as the, hey, tell Ari to do whatever, and it's, which one was it? So I say that by way of disclosure. It's great to see you. As you know, Ari, we can talk about politics all kinds of ways. One thing that your book and some of your career does is peel back these structural underlying inequities. I'm going to read one example, and then you break it down for us. You write in the book 5 of the current 6 conservative justices on the Supreme Court were appointed by presidents who lost the popular
because Trump, who at the time did not win the popular vote, and senators who were not elected by a minority of Americans were able to use their power on the bench to basically give Trump a massive get out of jail free card. That is just one example of how minority rule played out in the 2024 election.
Which parts of this do you view as changeable?
Well, I would hope that it would all be changeable in the sense that we can appoint different judges, we can have different people draw political maps, we can reform the system to some extent, in some ways easier than others. But one of the things I do worry with Trump in particular is that minority rule could become reinforcing, meaning that he's going to appoint even more judges to the bench now. They're going to make even more sweeping decisions that's going to reinforce his power. So you could have this Democratic doom loop, right, where someone who's taking advantage of a broken system gets put back in power and then deepens that broken system, and thus it becomes harder to change. And so Democrats are going to have to figure out, where can they push back? If they don't control Washington, where can they push back to try to make the system more fair? Right now, that's probably at the state level. And then they'll try to use the states as the laboratory for democracy when they are able to try to get back in power in Washington.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. I already did my disclosure.